Hello, welcome to Take 10 on Tuesdays with the Tennessee Tribune. My name is Sandra Long-Weaver, and I'm the editorial director for the Tribune. Today, we are privileged to have as our guest the Reverend Mark Tyler, who is the pastor of Mother Bethel A.M.E. Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What brings you here, Mark? I understand that this is the meeting of the Council of Bishops, the annual meeting of the Council of Bishops. And this is just the business meeting that's going on now?
Yes, Sandra, good to see you again. Different seeing you now in Nashville as opposed to Philadelphia. But I'm here because the A.M.E. Church is here. And one of the hallmarks of the A.M.E. Church is that we are a church that gathers regularly. And we meet literally all around the world. And so now we're here for the Bishops' Council and also for the General Board meeting. That's an annual meeting where we kind of check in on the church and see where we are financially, where our different commissions are, and find out about our schools of higher education. So it's a lot of work that happens in about 3 or 4 days. And so while we're here this time, we're taking advantage of the time and working on a new documentary about the A.M.E. Church.
Well, tell us a little bit about this documentary. I know that you've done several others for the A.M.E. Church as well. One that focuses on Richard Allen, who is the founder of the A.M.E. Church, and then another from in 2012 when you were also meeting here in Nashville for General Conference, which is every 4 years, and I think it's called Echoes of General Conference.
Exactly.
And what will this documentary focus on?
Well, I think what's different about this documentary is that the first two really looked back. So the documentary about Richard Allen, which people can see, by the way, for free at the Mother Bethel website, motherbethel.org, and they can always purchase it, but we wanted it free so that our worldwide denomination could have an opportunity to see it. That and Echoes both look back. This documentary is really looking at the church today and going forward. And this is something that is being brought to the world by the Council of Bishops of the A.M.E. Church. This is their project. Phil Katz and myself are just honored really to work on it, and my wife Leslie as well, who's helping us as well. And so this one is really asking the question of the bishops, what's the spirit of the African Methodist Church? And depending on who you speak to, you might get a different answer, but it's amazing how much synergy there is. Whether the person that you interview considers themselves conservative or liberal, more charismatic in worship or kind of more traditional in worship, there's a lot of synergy about what the spirit of African Methodism is.
Oh, that sounds fascinating, Mark. So you're interviewing as many bishops as possible during this conference, so in preparation for the documentary. And the documentary will air in 2016, is that correct?
That's correct. So the documentary we hope will be ready by the next General Conference. Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of the things that we continue to hear from them is that when you talk about the spirit of African Methodism, that so much of it really rests on the shoulders of our founder, Richard Allen. Bishop Allen was born in 1760 as a slave in Philadelphia to a colonial chief justice of the colonial Supreme Court, and purchased his own freedom as a young man in his 20s, and began preaching in the Methodist Church, what is now the United Methodist Church. And but Bishop Allen was such an incredible person. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was an entrepreneur. He had a chimney sweep business, and one of his clients was George Washington. So the first White House, so to speak, the executive mansion in Philadelphia, which was uncovered recently,
right,
on 6th and Market. Mm-hmm. Bishop Allen had the contract to clean those chimneys.
Wow.
Bishop Allen was a liberationist. Mm-hmm. Spoke a great deal about abolition and the abolishment of slavery and things of that nature. He was an incredible person. And so you talk about the spirit of African Methodism today. You may get different answers because he was you couldn't put him in one box.
Right.
Yeah. So we represent him today in many different ways.
Okay. I think what other topics are you focusing on when you're interviewing the bishops for the documentary, which does celebrate the 200th anniversary of the first General Conference? Is that right?
That's correct. Right. So the first General Conference was in 1816 in April, held in Philadelphia at Richard Allen's house and at Mother Bethel. And so this is a celebration of it. And so we're really looking at how is that spirit alive today, and more importantly, how do we keep it alive tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
So that in the United States, for example, like most Protestant churches, it's kind of tough out there. That churches are really faced with a lot of issues of declining membership or stagnant membership.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we re-energize those churches? Again, it's no different in our denomination than in the Catholic Church and Lutheran churches and things of that nature. And so how do we recapture that zeal that was alive in those early founders? And a part of what we're hearing from a lot of the bishops is that we need to look toward Africa. So when you think, when you think about the A.M.E. Church, again, we're on 5 continents.
Right.
We're in 40 countries,
Mm-hmm.
speak multiple languages, and we are really seeing an explosion of growth in Africa. But again, not unlike many of those other denominations I mentioned earlier,
Right.
that many of them are having their largest success right now in places that we consider to be, or that we call developing countries. And so I think that we can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters in Africa and in the Caribbean. And we're even starting to see buds sprout up in South America in places that we haven't had before. Brazil, for example,
Really?
is a tremendous opportunity for us. As you know, there are more black folk in Brazil
Right.
than even in the U.S. And so it's a tremendous field for us, and we hope to see something come out of that soon. So those are some of the things we're asking the bishops to talk about, and really to get them to tell us what their hopes and dreams are for the A.M.E. Church.
Right, and actually that leads right into my next question, because I was curious as we're in 2014, but it's still early 21st century. Where do you see or what are the bishops saying about the A.M.E. Church in the 21st century? It's come so very far and has so much history in the U.S.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll take a cue from Bishop DeVoe, who we just interviewed him right before we do this segment here.
And Bishop DeVoe
Bishop William DeVoe is the bishop in the 2nd District, which is Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and North Carolina.
Okay.
And they're seeing a lot of growth in those areas right now, especially the Maryland suburbs. But one of the things Bishop DeVoe said is that I found helpful is that as we look forward, he's most hopeful because of the grace of God. That at the end of the day, it's not our strength that will make the church grow, because it was never our strength in the beginning. It wasn't Richard Allen. He was even as a quote-unquote middle-class person in the early 1800s, he had very meager means, and he's surrounded by people who were by and large very poor. But they did incredible work. They started institutions that survived 200 years and are still thriving and growing. Started, colleges and universities in the 1860s and 1870s. Wilberforce University, first A.M.E. school. We purchased that from the Methodist Church in 1863. Now that's in the middle of the Civil War.
Right.
The white Methodists couldn't keep it open, and we bought a college in 1863.
Wow.
In the Civil War, the outcome was far from being decided north or south.
Right.
And so when you consider the fact that we did so much with so little, recognizing it was never in our power, that's one of the things that I share that same sentiment as Bishop DeVoe, that it's really not on us. We're just really the vessels.
Okay. And I understand there's also another project that may be in the works about the history of the A.M.E. Church in South Carolina. Is that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I just touch on that, I would like to say that it's unfortunate that a conflict has kept the executive producer away today, Bishop Vashti McKenzie. She was also the executive producer over Echoes from the General Conference, and this is really her idea and her concept. Phil and I are really just kind of driving it, but hopefully you'll get a chance to maybe even do a written article with her to follow up on it. But we do have another project that's unrelated to the Council of Bishops coming out of our 7th District, South Carolina, largest district in the U.S., 600 plus churches in one state.
Wow.
It's the only state
in
the country.
State?
It is literally the only state in the country that has more A.M.E. churches than Baptist churches.
Wow.
So, it is, it's A.M.E. heaven in South Carolina.
Right.
So we're doing a project there called the A.M.E. Movement. We're looking at getting the funding to finish it. We've done all the interviews already, and it really talks about the spirit of the A.M.E. Church there that began in 1815. Many people don't know Denmark Vesey, for example, was a lay preacher in the A.M.E. Church and was only able to organize his failed revolt because of the fact that there were A.M.E. church buildings in Charleston in 1822.
Wow.
And they used those buildings to organize and to meet. As a result, the A.M.E. church paid a heavy price. Our buildings were burned down to the ground. The church was banned and outlawed in South Carolina until the end of the Civil War. But even then, the church went underground.
Right.
So if you go to Charleston now, you see Emmanuel Church, Emmanuel A.M.E. Church in the old part of South Charleston. That is that same church. In fact, so that congregation never considers themselves being disbanded. You know, if you talk to them, they'll say, no, 1822, we just went underground.
Oh,
and
I
we
see.
resurfaced in 1865.
Okay.
And so this building is here now, but the congregation never went away. And so James Clyburn is a part of the persons that we interviewed, a number of civil rights heroes like Bishop Fred Calhoun James, Bishop Grady, and others who were active with Dr. King in different pockets. Charleston, Columbia, Somerton, all these places were hotbeds of civil rights activity, not just one A.M.E. church, but all throughout the state. And it's a wonderful story that we're hoping gets told.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's several wonderful stories that are that you're pulling together and for the A.M.E. Church. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And again, we were with Reverend Mark Tyler of Mother Bethel A.M.E. Church, who's in Nashville, interviewing bishops who are doing the annual Bishops' Council meeting. Thank you.